Towards the end of the Atlanta campaign, federal troops under William T. Sherman were trying their best to strike at the last railroad entering the city from the south at Jonesboro, and Confederate forces under General Hardee were doing their best to defend it, but they found themselves heavily outnumbered and outgunned, eventually forced to retreat down to Lovejoy Station. Similar to the fields of France in World War I, you can see that the majority of these graves all have similar dates of death. August 31st, which was the first day of the Battle of Jonesboro, and the following morning they were forced to conduct a running retreat to Lovejoy Station, where they regrouped and Sherman began his march to Savannah. More than that, you can see what an uphill battle the Atlanta campaign became. All of these graves belong to relatively low-ranking people in Georgia infantry units, meaning that at that point in time, the majority of the folks defending it were just locals with rifles, trying their best to stop Sherman's men from taking the city. But from August 31st to September 1st, they did their best to hold Union troops off at the Battle of Jonesboro. Hundreds died, and it's now believed that up to 1,000 Confederate soldiers may be interred in this cemetery. Of course, during the battle, they were usually buried where they fell, or in the closest cemetery to them, or in someone's front yard. But after the war, most of their bodies were brought here. Unfortunately, most of their identities were lost in the process. We know very few of these graves. 712 are actually here with headstones, but very few have names on them. Very sad. But they are all buried in the same common ground in the Patrick Cleburne Cemetery, named after famed Confederate General Patrick Cleburne. Amid the many unmarked graves of Georgia infantrymen and low-ranking privates who were trying to defend Atlanta are the graves of several men in the 10th Texas Infantry Regiment, folks who came from out west to help support the siege of Atlanta. Of course, they retreated with everybody else on September 1st, 1864, as Sherman moved into the city, but these are some of the folks who actually helped defend Atlanta that were not locals. One of the marked graves in the Patrick Cleburne Cemetery belongs to Robert Lindsay, the Confederate ensign who was killed on the first day of the Battle of Jonesboro, simply bringing the battle flag to the front lines. This was considered very dishonorable. It would be on par with shooting a chaplain or a medic, and so he was buried in Clayton County where he fell. They never did locate his grave, but in the early 1990s, history groups erected a sort of memorial for him right next to the main monument in the cemetery here in the center of the Patrick Cleburne Cemetery for Confederate soldiers.